Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. The Philadelphia Eagles have gotten onto the coaching carousel, and there's been a lot of news that's been breaking since Sunday evening's matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. And what we wanted to do was take a couple of moments and just look at the Philadelphia Eagles updates and the rumors and things to that effect, and who might be joining or leaving the Philadelphia Eagles coaching staff, and also looking at who's sticking around. Now, before we get going any further, I did reach out to the Philadelphia Eagles for comment, and the Eagles declined to comment. So there's your heads up there. So we're going to start with the defensive side of the ball, because that is the side of the football that needs the most work. The offensive side of the football at least has standout players. It's got a quarterback that hopefully this was a fluke year, but the defensive side of the football is the side of the football that needs the most help. The Philadelphia Eagles earlier in the season demoted Sean Desai. They stripped him of play calling responsibilities, and while he did retain the defensive coordinator title, Nick Sirianni was very clear that it was Matt Patricia who was going to have the final say on defense, starting with the Seahawks game and moving forward through the rest of the season. So as soon as that news broke, you would have had to have your head buried in the sand or be willfully ignorant to not see the writing on the wall that Sean Desai was going to be looking for a new job this offseason, and that is what happened. Nick Sirianni reportedly did fire Sean Desai going into the Kansas City Chiefs-Buffalo Bills game. That's when the news broke. Now, we'll put a pin in the Nick Sirianni part of this, but Sean Desai was okay at best. And at the time that the Eagles stripped him of play-calling responsibilities, the Eagles were ranked at or near the bottom in most defensive statistics. And the Eagles' defense dropped off precipitously after the bye. One of the things I was very vocal about coming off of the bye was the significant decline in the run game from the defense. The Eagles' defense was allowing on average 66.3 rushing yards per game going into the bye. Coming off of the bye, they were giving up 100-plus yard rushing games left and right. Before the bye, the only 100-plus yard rushing game that they gave up was the game against the Washington Commanders where they went into overtime. So the Philadelphia Eagles had a significant drop in run game performance on the defense, and that was pretty well equivalent across the board. So the Eagles removed play calling responsibility from Sean Desai and gave it to Matt Patricia, senior defensive assistant. That was like moving from bad to worse, because Matt Patricia did absolutely nothing to make the Eagles better, and in my opinion, made them significantly worse. The Eagles, under Matt Patricia's leadership, went 1-4 in their last 5 games. They forced 0 punts against a bottom-of-the-league Arizona Cardinals team. Were allowing 300, 400-yard offenses to opposing teams over the course of that entire stretch. It was bad. It was beyond what Sean Desai was doing. So Matt Patricia was also somebody that was probably not going to be hanging around. Now, Matt Patricia was not fired, but it also came to light that Matt Patricia is not under contract, and he is reportedly, according to Tom Pelissero, looking for other opportunities. And honestly, even if he was not looking for other opportunities, I don't think the Eagles re-up his contract. I don't think the Eagles rehire him. Whatever his employment arrangement with them looked like, I don't think the Eagles keep him around. So both Desai and Patricia are gone, and really that makes sense, because for the entirety of the season, even when the Eagles were 10-1, the Eagles' defense didn't seem like it was passing the eye test for the most part. If you watched any of the playoff games that have been occurring that didn't involve the Eagles, you saw teams that were playing very aggressively, that were able to tackle, that were very present. And the Philadelphia Eagles, especially in the back half of the season, the defense wasn't palpable, and that was something that Sean Desai heralded when he came into Philadelphia. He wanted the Eagles' defense to be palpable. Now, flipping to the offensive side of the football, the offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson. This is his second job in the NFL. His first job was as the Eagles quarterback coach. He was brought on with Nick Sirianni. Johnson became the offensive coordinator and assumed the play calling responsibilities for the offense, but he was also calling Nick Sirianni's designs and Nick Sirianni's schemes. And that's where a lot of the confusion and a lot of the concern offensively seems to have stemmed from. You have terrible decisions that are going on the field, like throwing a deep ball on 3rd and 2, but you also have play designs that are leaving about 2/3 of the field open when you don't have players crossing through the middle of the numbers. The Eagles' offense never passed the eye test. It never felt like it was comfortable. It definitely didn't look as good as it did during the 2022 to 23 season. And so now, according to Derek Gunn at Jacob Sports, and it was confirmed through other outlets, Brian Johnson will be moving on. Now, his situation was a little bit trickier. Brian Johnson was under consideration for head coaching positions by a number of teams. The Carolina Panthers, the Atlanta Falcons, the Tennessee Titans were all mentioned. If Brian Johnson were to be fired by the Philadelphia Eagles, that would, A, not look good for Brian Johnson, and the Eagles don't necessarily want to sabotage him as he's looking for head coaching opportunities, and B, the Eagles would have been deprived of potential compensatory draft picks called JC2A picks for having a minority candidate move on to a head coaching position. At this point, though, the Panthers have named a number of candidates that they are going to continue with, and Johnson was not on that list. The Tennessee Titans have hired Brian Callahan, former Bengals offensive coordinator, to be their head coach, and the Atlanta Falcons have been in multiple interviews with former New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick. And I don't see Brian Johnson comparing with Bill Belichick at all. It is very likely that the Eagles are just going to outright move on from Johnson to be able to have a new offensive coordinator in the position. There's speculation that that could be Indianapolis Colts offensive coordinator Jim Bob Cooter, who has a relationship with Nick Sirianni and who was spotted around the NovaCare complex a couple of seasons ago as he was working with Sirianni and offering advice and consulting and things of that nature. Given that Frank Reich was fired by the Carolina Panthers, it is entirely possible that he could be brought back to Philadelphia as well. These are all speculation, names that have been in the rumor mill. Nothing has been officially confirmed in that regard. On the defensive side of the football, the Eagles have reportedly interviewed a number of folks at this point. Former Giants defensive coordinator Wink Martindale was among that list. Former Washington Commanders head coach Ron Rivera was another one. While the Commanders haven't done so great under him, the last time he was a defensive coordinator, the defense was number 1 in the league. That was back in the 2010-2011 era, and Rivera is somebody who has expressed an interest in being a defensive coordinator somewhere else. Additionally, the Eagles have interviewed Mike Caldwell, who was fired by the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Eagles are already starting to put those pieces together, and it remains to be seen what is going to happen with the offensive coordinator position. Now, those are the changes that are happening. What is staying the same? Well, let's start with the obvious. The third coordinator for the Eagles, Michael Clay, was on the hot seat following the 2022 to 2023 season. The Eagles opted to give him a second chance, and special teams was a huge bright spot on a team that didn't really have a ton of bright spots by the end of the season. So Clay really turned the special teams unit around. He is sticking around, and that is well earned for him. But the bigger news on that regard is Nick Sirianni. All indications seem to be pointing to him sticking around and being the head coach for the 2024 to 25 NFL season. Those clues, those breadcrumbs did start to surface as the Eagles were working through this past week. Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman were reportedly involved in finding coordinator candidates, and there is no reason why both of those two should have been working together if Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie were going to be moving on from Nick Sirianni. Then we go back to the Sean Desai firing. The Sean Desai firing was done by Nick Sirianni, so we're going to go back. When I said we'll revisit that, put a pin in it for now, we're revisiting that now. There is no reason for the report to include Nick Sirianni's involvement if Nick Sirianni is not going to be the head coach for the 2024 to 25 season. So it seemed very likely that Sirianni was going to be back when that report came out. But in case none of that convinced you, one big thing that has been missing over the course of this week was the mandatory end-of-year press conference. It's required by the NFL. It must include some combination of the head coach, the general manager, the club president, or the chief executive of the team. The Eagles, throughout all of this, had not had that press conference, and that's presumably because of all of the things that were happening behind the scenes. The Eagles announced on Monday afternoon that required press conference will occur on Wednesday, and it will include both Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni. So the Eagles' coaching situation for the 2024 to 25 season is looking much clearer. The Eagles will very likely be retaining Nick Sirianni as head coach. They'll also retain Michael Clay. He was never really on the hot seat this season. The Eagles will be moving on from Brian Johnson at offensive coordinator. They will be moving on from Sean Desai at defensive coordinator. They will be moving on from Matt Patricia as senior defensive assistant. So the Eagles will enter the 2024 to 25 season with 2 new coordinators for the second straight year. And while sometimes this is a good thing, because if you're a good team, you tend to have coordinators move through, this definitely raises a few concerns regarding consistency and being able to get back on the right footing. All of that remains to be seen. We will hopefully see better performance from both the offense and the defense units going into next year. There are definitely a lot more pieces that need to be put together before the Eagles can field a formidable team in the 2024 season. But as always, let me know what you think in the comments below. Should the Eagles have moved on from Sirianni, or did you agree with keeping him around? What are your thoughts about the coordinator changes on the offense and defensive side of the football? Who should the Eagles consider for those positions? Let me know. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning in to the Bird's Nest podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, and by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Amazon Podcasts, and Spotify. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles coverage. And if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles.